I actually need advice, but I'm way too scared to actually say something. I was met a guy online, he's 17 and I'm 13, we were just talking and stuff, and a week later he tells me, okay, 'cause I don't want your parents to be mad you're dating a 17 years old. I said, yeah, I don't know, my parents would be mad if I'm dating at all, and then he told me just not to tell them. I said okay, and now he assumes we're dating. I really don't want to tell him anything, because I don't want to make things awkward between us, but I also don't like him at all. I like him, just not like that. I know I should tell him I don't want to have a relationship, but he's like really nice besides that and I don't want to ruin our relationship.
I'm afraid of asking dumb questions. What should I do? I work with really sharp coworkers who have been on our team and in the industry for years. I often find myself unwilling to ask questions that would enhance my productivity for fear of seeming incompetent. This may sound irrational, but I haven't seen any evidence that it isn't a legit fear so far. What should I do?
Get nervous when asking women out. There's someone I like, I need advice to get over my fears, that I need advice, weary face. I've been overthinking this way too much. I wanted to ask her out yesterday, but I got anxious and just couldn't do it. I have her on Facebook. She gave me her info when I asked a while ago. Friend told me to just send her a message there and ask her out. I would like to do it in person though. I feel like asking people out through message is kind of weak. What should I do? If I ask her out through message, what should I tell her? I need to do this. I need to face this fear and put it behind me once and for all. I really hate having these things tearing me apart. Any advice is appreciated. Edit. I asked her out in person. She said no. However, I don't care. This was as much about facing my fears as it was about asking her out. I felt a huge relief afterwards. There'll be other women anyway, and the next time I ask them out, it won't be this much of a hassle. Regardless of that, thank you everybody for the advice and for giving me the necessary push to do this. I didn't get the outcome that I wanted, but believe me when I say that this has taken a huge weight off my shoulders.
Anybody else scared to ask for things? I just realized that dealing with parents has left me with severe anxiety about asking for things. I feel sick asking my roommates for anything. But if they ask me for things, I'm more than willing to provide it. Knocking on their doors gives me crazy anxiety. I can't stop thinking of knocking on Mom's bedroom door to ask her for food. I would stand there for 5 minutes psyching myself up. She just made me feel like I was a burden. Like every need of mine was annoying, destroying her quality of life. Her sigh as she got up from her chair to take care of me still makes me want to die. I subconsciously expect this from other people now. Even though so far I haven't met anyone as bad as Mom. What innocent little thing are you scared to ask anyone for because of parents?
What to do when interested in people, but afraid of your own questions. I often find myself really wanting to engage with others and learn more about them, but I find myself always wanting to drive straight to the core of things, so I can connect with people based on what drives them / who they really are, rather than just as a collection of observed behaviors. Understandably, though, people often don't like that because it goes further faster than they were comfortable going. I try to scale this back, but if I meet someone who, for example, has been less fortunate economically than I have, I don't know how to come at that from the side other than basically abandoning it and switching to small talk, which doesn't work out in its own way, obviously. What do you guys do? Have you found a way to approach subjects that go deep without making people go, WTF? I don't know you. Or do you do something else instead?
A few questions I have for Indigenous Australians that I'm too afraid to ask an Indigenous Australian opinion. Actually, I did ask an elder who was co-facilitating my compulsory Indigenous Studies unit, and they weren't able to answer them. I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I really just want clarification because I think they cut to the heart of the issues surrounding the thorny relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. So whether or not you're Indigenous, if you can shed some light on these questions, it will help clarify things for me and many others, I'm sure. 1. Do Indigenous Australians collectively have an endgame to their campaigning? Will they ever admit to or agree when systemic racism and disadvantage has been removed such that there are no remaining barriers to their advancement in society? I'm not even sure what they want because their campaigns are often vague and bombastic. Do they want non-Indigenous Australians to pack up and leave? Do they want to be acknowledged at every meeting or every time a non-Indigenous person opens their mouth? Personal apology from everyone? Endless handouts and provisions? 2. Does focusing and educating on historical injustice and isolated incidents of racism set Indigenous youth in good stead to become prosperous members of society, or does that just breed resentment and create a rift between them? 3. Why is there never any acknowledgement of the many supports, comforts, conveniences, and luxuries that Western technology has provided? Who would opt to return to a life of constant scavenging and pain and premature death from easily treatable diseases and injuries? The lifestyle of the noble savage is often romanticized, but the fact is it was a brutal, brief existence, and there's a reason humanity moved away from it as soon as it was able to. Why have I never heard any of this acknowledged? 4. Why do elders seem so disconnected from troubled Indigenous youth? If they're the only ones who can reach them, why, when I was volunteering and doing community work, would I never see elders out there in the trenches trying to get wayward Indigenous youth off the streets and into rehab and a better life, rather just attending ceremonial meetings and making vague statements and taking cheap shots at isolated incidents of apparent racism? 5. How are Indigenous youth supposed to thrive when they're being torn between two worlds? Assimilating with Western society and embracing tertiary education and careers whilst being guilt-ridden by relatives for betraying their heritage who feel like they're entitled to the fruits of their labor? 6. At what point does intergenerational trauma go from being an explanation to an excuse used to downplay or indemnify against consciously criminal behavior? I've worked in stores where people thought that Indigenous thieves were justified in stealing things for various reasons. The legal system appears to be undeniably softer on them as well these days. Does holding them to a different standard of behavior result in better outcomes for them? 7. What should be done with those who refuse to work and assimilate and despise non-Indigenous, but wish to live in metro areas rather than join a remote community? A lot of non-Indigenous have to put up with a lot of aggressive racism from Indigenous every time they walk through the city. 8. Besides acknowledgement, how do you even make reparations for past injustices? How do you translate that into tangible benefits or scholarships, etc., for Indigenous youth, such that they will be empowered without becoming dependent on government provisions? 9. Why do Indigenous Australians so rarely seem to take the effort to upkeep or maintain their own property? I spoke with someone who spent their career traveling around to remote Aboriginal communities, and they told me that they never once saw an Indigenous person doing chores or upkeeping their property. Why not? 10. During an Indigenous learning workshop, I was informed that there are still cultural differences, such as eye contact can be interpreted as confrontation, and there's less recognition of property ownership. What? These people aren't being plucked from an uncontacted tribe in the middle of the outback, so why haven't they been educated in line with Western society? Thanks for all the replies. I haven't read any yet, but I hope it's inspired some constructive discussion. 2 more points. 11. Is it really to be believed that Indigenous Australians have a special connection to the land? I know tertiary educated atheists who say so. That's hocus-pocus spiritual nonsense to me. If I am born in the same hospital as an Indigenous person, why would they have a connection to the land that I don't? We're both Australian, and to say otherwise is a form of bigotry. I can understand the group ties to certain locations, but the concept of a spiritual connection is ridiculous and easily exploitable for monetary gains, as we have seen in recent years. 12. Why are all non-Indigenous, or at least white Australians, so often painted with the same tar brush regardless of who they are, what they've done, when their families immigrated to Australia? And why should any descendants of convicts be condemned for the actions of their ancestors? When Aboriginals commit crimes, we must refrain from making generalizations, but apparently it's permissible for Indigenous spokespeople to make damning generalizations about white Australians.
Not Aboriginal myself, but worked in the far northern areas of Australia as a teacher for 4 years and continue to maintain some close relationships with Aboriginal families both in remote and metro areas. My thoughts, all of which are completely not presented as fact. It's worth remembering that there's no collective Aboriginals. When we speak about Indigenous Australia, we're talking about thousands of different groups of people. It's hard to put a blanket answer on things like this. I think that education about the past is useful for everyone as it gives some perspective on why things are the way they are currently. Having lived in several remote Aboriginal communities, these people have generally been very supportive of new technologies and ways to do things. Why is it not more celebrated? Well, the bad has generally outweighed the good. Elders are only as powerful as their people let them be. Disengaged youth of all races aren't much inclined to listen to their old people. I've found that the more remote the community, the more connected the people are to their stories and lore. One of the hardest questions to answer. I know quite a few very successful and also very culturally black people. It's one of the challenges they speak about the most. My own understanding is that it's a deeply personal conflict that each person goes through. I work in education, and a statement I love is that may explain the behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. Applying this to all things helps. Sure, there's things happening in your life and lives before you that make it challenging to do the right thing. We are all still subject to the law. If you want to live in a modern society, being in town, you need to contribute to it. People who don't want to do so should be held to the same standards, regardless of race. Culture shouldn't preclude you from a need to contribute to society. 8. Knowing the history and participating as much as one can in creating a new culture of acceptance and enthusiastic multiculturalism. This is true of all races. As for dependency on handouts like scholarships, I have some more specific beliefs about that. Mainly, we should ensure that scholarships are about responding to need in industry rather than just applicants' race or gender. 9. You're confusing a racial stereotype with a socioeconomic stereotype. Yes, we often see people in poverty who struggle to upkeep their homes, regardless of color. Some of my mates, even in super remote areas, have houses that would put my own to shame. 10. Just like people from other countries have specific cultural quirks that we don't, Indian head bobble being one of my favorites, Aboriginal people maintain cultural traditions that aren't perfectly in line with Australia as a whole. You can choose to see this as bad or think of it as part of living in a multicultural society.
I honestly don't have time to read all of that, but am Indigenous, so I would like to weigh in, and this might offend some, but it's my point of view. I don't feel disadvantaged. I am quite lucky. I am self-employed, built my business from the ground up, and have a home that I own. I don't practice Aboriginal traditions, nor am I an activist for Aboriginal rights. I begrudge many of the protests for Indigenous rights, along with condemning the change the date marches every year. I respect the 26th of January as a date that all of Australians celebrate this country as one. This view is shared by many elders. I believe that all of the Aboriginal rights protesters and the like originate from white people that think they know what our people want/need/desire. I don't receive any benefits or incentives apart from closing the gap, which gives me cheaper medication. I understand that there are a lot of disadvantage in the community, however, it's not as large or widespread as the narrative dictates. We have come a long way in reconciliation, and that needs to be applauded. But Aboriginals have a high rate of incarceration. Well, they need to stop committing crimes. I hate welcome to country every time I turn the TV on or go to a sporting event, and I refuse to participate. I voted no to The Voice because it would have done nothing but create more bureaucrats and red tape. I think it was a complete fail that the government needs to be held to account for. Nothing makes me angrier than money being spent on bureaucrats pushing pens, making decisions without consultation only to fit their narrative. In short, leave us the fuck alone.
I've tried to take this seriously and also admit when I don't know something. Closing the gap and a treaty seem to be the main things mentioned when I've talked to Indigenous people. The first one is objective and measurable. Closing the gap in life expectancy, wealth, and punishments for crime. In law school, we studied how over-policing in Indigenous communities caused more prison terms for the same crimes that go unpunished in white communities, e.g. the trifecta of drinking on the street, offensive language, and resisting arrest. The first two happen every single day in trendy white majority suburbs, and the third can only happen if police are around hassling you about the first. Treaty is more vague but relates to what happened with the Maori in New Zealand, like an official peace treaty after the colonialism. Teaching history in general is important and not necessarily contrary to prosperity. Kinda the opposite. If you learn about the bad things in the past, you can fix the present and future. We all learn from our mistakes every day. Culture. Why do Christians sacrifice something for Lent when they have so many modern amenities? Why do Jews avoid pork? Culture and tradition shape everyone, and sometimes traditional practices are more complicated than modern ones, but they're valued as tradition. Christians love holding Bibles even though phones exist, etc. It's the same in every culture. We cling to the past because it links us to the legacy of our ancestors. I don't know the answer to this, nor do I know if it's true, so I won't respond. You can ask the same thing about Christians, Jews, and Islamic people. People have culture and they function in modern society, these things don't contradict. You can care about nature while living in a city. Look at how many Australians love bushwalking and going to the beach. Our culture is built on love of nature and a connection to land, but we don't use those terms. Indigenous people are 3% of the population and something like 30% of the prison population. I understand that you have the impression that they're not punished, but this impression doesn't match the stats. Aggression should not be tolerated. At the same time, it's also okay for people to care about their own cultures. It's complicated. Not everyone neatly fits into society, but a society is not just about you, it's about how we build community together. I'm not saying this is easy at all. Scholarships and so on are a start. Maybe read the studies done on universal basic income. I think they'll really give you a more nuanced view of what happens when you give people free money. Also look into the charity Give Directly. I don't know the answer to this, nor do I know if it's true, so I won't respond. Why do Jews have circumcision? Why do Christians value a book in the digital age? Why do Islamic people often like more conservative clothes? If you were brought up with a cultural trait of not wanting private property, you'd also think differently. Culture shapes us. It's not just the society we live in, it's also our families.